Everything is personal right here. Everything is personal right here.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to another episode of Everything is Personal. And today, I really do have a special guest. I say I have a special guest, but I really do have a special guest because I'm a big fan of this man, Mr. Derek Frank. Welcome to the show.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thank you for being on. Like I said, I saw you play over the baked potato, and we sort of caught up a couple of different places, and I started kind of getting a feel for the music that you listen to. But what kind of music did you listen to growing up as a kid?
Oh, well, growing up, before I became a musician, I was watching MTV all the time. So it was kind of like whatever was in rotation on MTV. But I kind of liked everything back then. I liked pop music. I liked a lot of rock music. I was a big Devo fan. Like some of my earliest bands that I was into were Queen, Devo, Van Halen. Those were kind of some of the earliest ones.
Did you grow up like in a musical household? Did your parents listen to music?
I mean, they listen to music. My parents weren't musicians, so I'm the only one of the family that chose this path. Um, but like my dad had an 8-track collection. I remember the first album I ever listened to was Queen, News of the World, and I just loved We Will Rock You. As a kid, you can latch on to that drum groove and the whole, shout vocal thing.
All right, so let's go back to I was going to say your origin story, and no pun intended for the album, but maybe it is intended. Where did you grow up?
So grew up in Pittsburgh. Yeah, I was born, yeah, in born in Pittsburgh and lived my first few years of my life in a suburb there. Then moved to Baltimore for a little bit, and then back to Pittsburgh, and then we kind of moved around a lot after that. But I was basically in Pittsburgh until I was about 10, and that's where I discovered music, discovered my love of music, and pretty much where I decided that I was going to be a musician. I didn't start playing in Pittsburgh. I was too young, but it's kind of where I figured out that that was my path.
So, what was your family like? Were your parents together? Do you have siblings?
I have a sister. She's 3 years older. My parents were together when I was a kid. They split up when I was in my 20s. But yeah, we had kind of your typical suburban childhood. Really, my dad worked for U.S. Steel, which was the big corporation in Pittsburgh, and we lived in a suburb and kind of had your typical suburban childhood.
Yeah. So, I grew up in Philly. So they
Oh,
say
cool.
like Pennsylvania is Philly and Pittsburgh, and then you have Alabama in between, kind of
Yeah,
thing.
right. I guess it makes sense. Yeah,
So people don't know, like, oh, Pittsburgh and Philly, it's far from each other and
for
completely
sure.
different. But like as you're growing up in Pittsburgh, and then you say you're moving around, like some kids don't know what they want to do. And some kids try different, like I'll play sports, or I'm gonna try to be an astronaut or anything like that. When did you kind of discover like music is it, and then this is what I'm gonna do with my career?
I mean, I feel pretty lucky that I did figure that out early on, even though I wasn't a player yet, and I didn't realize what it entailed and all that. I just somehow I knew when I first saw MTV. It sounds ridiculous, but when I could see people playing instruments, and it just added a visual thing to it, and I said, "Oh, that's how you make that sound." I was like, "That looks really cool, and I'm going to do that." So I pretty much decided when I was a kid, maybe 9 or 10 years old, but I didn't start playing until I was maybe about 13. I got a guitar and started guitar lessons, and maybe 6 to 8 months later, I discovered bass. So I didn't know the difference between guitar and bass, but I was waiting for my guitar lesson in the music store. There was a bass on the wall, and I was like, "What's that thing?" And he's like, "Oh, that's a bass guitar." I was like, "Wow, cool. Let me check that out." And I played it, and I just immediately knew that that's what I wanted to play. And so, I knew I wanted to be a musician at that point, but I didn't really know what instrument. I mean, I just kind of thought guitar. And then when I played bass, I realized that's what I wanted to do. And then I just, from that moment, once I bought my first bass, I just practiced all the time and was constantly just trying to figure out a way to do it, to make it work for me, you know?
It's interesting because like so I grew up I'm 52 and sort of the era of MTV was same kind of thing. Like I watch MTV and it was like that is my influence, but I didn't get this itch to be a musician. I think I saw like a Beastie Boys video and I saw Rick Rubin and I tried to figure out what does that guy do?
Mm.
And then I wanted to do what he did, which I wasn't sure what it was. But then my parents had an intervention for me. They actually had a psychiatrist came in and said, "You're gonna end up being a broke musician or whatever it is that you think you want to do. You need to go to physical therapy school and just do that so you can have a steady income." So it sounds like what you were saying is your parents were supportive. You know, they got you guitar lessons and all that stuff. So how did that help?
Yeah, I think that I mean, and that's very logical for a parent to want to do that because it is such a crapshoot, you know, trying to get into music and say, "Oh, I'm gonna make a living playing music." It's very it's very rare. People that pick up an instrument, it's very rare for them to be able to eventually make a living doing it. It's one of the hardest things ever. That's one reason why I feel so fortunate that I've been able to. Um, but luckily, my parents were very supportive. I probably got that talk a couple times, but it was more of just a suggestion than you need to do this. It was maybe find something to fall back on, still have to go to school, still have to get an education, which I'm glad I did. And but it was, once they saw that I was serious about it, which when I was in high school, I was getting serious. I started playing gigs when I was in high school and started putting all the hours in to practice my instrument. And I think they saw that and saw that I was serious about it. And, they never tried to talk me out of it, which I'm very thankful for.
So for somebody who's not a musician and somebody who's listening, like you were saying, you're getting guitar lessons and then you picked up a bass and you started playing the bass. Is there a similarity? Like, how did you know how to start playing, or were you just like, messing around with it at
I was
that
just
point?
messing around. I didn't know the difference. I would see these bands on MTV and I'd be like, oh, they've got two or three guitarists in the band. Cool. Like I didn't know what instrument, what each instrument's function was within the band. I mean, aside from obviously you see guitarists playing guitar solos. Um, and I just picked up the bass and for some reason it just felt right to me. It had four strings. They were, thicker, they were lower in pitch. And I just, for some reason, just gravitated toward it. It was just fun. I liked playing it. It's,
Hmm.
sometimes people say that they don't choose their instrument, it chooses them. I feel like maybe bass chose me. Maybe it just took that moment of me checking it out. And then once I played it, then I try to figure out what bass does. And I think I probably went into my lesson that day saying, I just played a bass guitar. What would that do if I played it in a band? And so, my teacher probably answered that question and I probably just started listening for bass more and paying more attention to bass. And I mean, I pretty much decided right there I was going to play it. So I was caddying at the golf course. That was kind of my job at the time, and saved up my caddying money and bought a bass pretty shortly after that encounter.
What? So, I mean, it's an interesting question. What does the bass do? Because there's so many, like, I was going to ask you this question anyway, but it sort of popped in my head timing wise. There's all these lists of best bass players, like, but you have a guy like, a Geddy Lee who plays lead, like sings lead and McCartney, and you have a Larry Graham or a Flea, like, I don't understand how they can put together a best of list because these players do different things for the song and for the band. So
Mhm.
I'm trying to like what in your definition, what does a bass player do in a band?
Well, first of all, those lists are tough. I never pay much attention to them because art is subjective, right? I mean, everybody that plays an instrument, you're an artist. You have your own voice on that instrument, and you can't say one's better than the other. It's just different. Everybody has a different style. So sure, there's some people that are, you could say, the most influential, and there's definitely some people. Paul McCartney is definitely one of the most influential. Um, and I mean, in my mind, he's one of the best. But that's just my opinion. It's, like I said, subjective. But bass player's role in the band basically is to provide the foundation. The bass provides the low note, the this sort of bridge between the harmony and the rhythm, between what the guitars and keyboards are doing and what the drums are doing. The bass kind of fits into both of those worlds. It provides that foundation, that low note that you need. We're playing mostly roots, which is the root of the chord that you're playing on, and it just gives that foundation for the harmony, the keys, the guitar, the vocals, the melody, all that to stack on top of.
Was there any like being an upfront band leader, and I'll get into sort of your career, session and playing in your own band, but playing up front, and then having vocals and all this stuff. How different is that than supporting the band, like staying in the back? I have a really good friend of mine who's was a bass player in a pretty well-known band, and he's like, I never wanted the spotlight on me. I just wanted to stand in the back, wanted to, play the groove, make sure that I support the songs and not be out there. But then, there's different players, like we just mentioned a couple of them, that, you stand out front and you're leading the band and you're actually providing vocals. How difficult is that to do?
Well, it's just different. It depends on what your vision is musically. For me, I like being a supported bass player. I'm not a lead singer. I'm not really a front man, although, like you said, we can get into what I'm doing with my solo project later. But I think people's roles within their band and their instrument kind of matches their personality a bit. Anybody who's a lead singer usually has a big personality, sometimes a big ego. It can be the same thing with a lead guitarist who steps out for solos. That could be part of their personality. Obviously, there's exceptions to the rules too. I know a lot of lead singers who off stage are very mellow and don't have that larger than life personality. And I know a lot of bass players that play in a supportive role, but then, they're very loud, outgoing people. I'm kind of an introvert, and I think that part of my personality kind of matches what I've chosen to do for my career, because I make a living as a supportive bass player. When you look at the artists that I've supported, I'm the bass player. I'm not the guy out front. I'm the guy supporting, and I started my own solo project because I feel like I have more to say than what I get to say as a supportive bass player. But I think in general, that's the path I took because it kind of matches my personality.
What was your first professional gig?
First professional gigs were, I was in a jazz quintet in Cleveland, Ohio. I joined this big band called Ohio Jazz Orchestra for Youth. It was based in Cleveland and kind of like an all-state jazz band sort of thing. And from there, like when I first got the gig as the bass player for that, some guys in the band were immediately like, okay, we're starting our own little quintet with a rhythm section and a sax player and a trumpet player, I think just a sax player. And so we formed this jazz quintet and immediately looked for places to play. So my first professional gigs were playing these restaurant/jazz club gigs in an area called University Circle in Cleveland, which is kind of where we had some jazz clubs back in the day. And we had kind of a steady, Friday night kind of gig. And I remember there were 5 of us and we made $125. So $25 a person. And we were thrilled.
Like, you're getting paid.
Bucks, Yeah. So that was kind of my first professional gig. And also at that time I was getting my reading together, and I was in my high school, I was playing in, all the musicals and things like that. And I started getting called for some musicals outside of that. So I was playing around Cleveland, playing like musical theater productions, playing in the pit band. And so I was 16 years old doing some of that stuff as well.
What was your goal to say, I'm going to have my own band, or were you like, I'm just going to be the best session guy and I want to play in everybody's albums kind of thing? Did you even have that kind of goal in the beginning?
I think it was the latter. I don't think I set out to be in a band or like have my own band and be famous and make it, so to speak. That was really never it. I just loved playing bass and I wanted to play with as many people as I could. And I think once I kind of realized that, there were hired gun session touring musicians out there, when I realized that was a thing, you could be a musician that gets paid to play with different artists and go on tour and things like that. I think that's where I wanted to go. I didn't really get into doing my own thing until later. And of course, I've played in bands where I was a band member and things like that. But I never really felt like that was my path to success or to any sort of income. I just kind of always wanted to be just a working bass player. I think the first time I realized that you could do that was when I was in high school. I loved the live Sting album Bring On the Night, which has some of the best session players out there. I mean, you've got Omar Hakim on drums and Daryl Jones on bass, Branford Marsalis, Kenny Kirkland. It was like this all-star band, and in seeing the documentary on it, you realize that these are all guys that Sting hired. And that kind of made me think, oh, you can be like one of these players and play with artists like Sting. And
get paid for it.
Yeah. And that's kind of where I wanted to go. And that was in high school. And I was like, yeah, I kind of want to be that kind of player.
So were you playing on albums first, and then who did you go out with first, like on the road? Was that Shania Twain, or was there somebody else?
No, my first touring, well, I moved to LA in 97. That's kind of when I started my career really after college and all that. And the first call I got to go on tour was with an artist named Brian Auger. He's a Hammond B3 legend, had a band called Brian Auger's Oblivion Express. And it was kind of like a acid jazz fusion band, but with vocals. Sort of came out of the mod scene in London from like the late 60s and developed into this fusion thing. But just ripping Hammond B3 organ player. And I got called to go on the road with him in like 2002. My buddy Dan Lutz was doing it, and he couldn't do a tour. So he gave Brian my number and we jammed, and Brian asked me if I wanted to join the band. So I played with Brian for a number of years. He took me all over the world. I mean, we did a lot of Europe. We did Japan, Australia, New Zealand, US and Canada, obviously. And that was a blast, very, very musical, very musically demanding, and really fun. And I did that for a number of years. I think the last time I played with Brian was around 2015. But I did it pretty solid for, a good 6 years or so. And then kind of rotated with a couple other bass players.
In terms of your musical influences and all that, I think I read somewhere that you also were listening to like 70s TV and themes and movies and all that stuff. I'll tell you what I hear, and you kind of tell me what your influences are. Like, I think I saw you at the Great Boy All Star thing, but I definitely see that type of influence mixed in with some jazz and like a Herbie Hancock type of Headhunters groove. I see there's a mixture of those influences in your music, but I wanted to kind of mirror back to you what you think your musical influences are and sort of how you're taking it to the next level.
Well, it's interesting because I've got so many different influences musically and bass player wise, and they all kind of fit into different gigs that I do. Like I would definitely say Jaco Pastorius is a big influence. I mean, he's such a, influential bass player. But that Jaco influence doesn't show itself when I'm playing with Shania Twain or Gwen Stefani. Like, there's no place for it there. I'm a big Rocco Prestia from Tower of Power. He's like one of my biggest influences. Again, that influence doesn't come through in the sort of supportive gigs that I do, but those things come through in my own music. I'm a big, Herbie Hancock, you mentioned Headhunters, Paul Jackson, big influence of mine. That comes through in my own music, but I don't bring that to playing pop rock gigs. So, on those gigs, I'm bringing, when I'm a supportive player, I'm bringing more of my Paul McCartney, John Paul Jones influence, Pino Palladino, even like when I'm doing rock stuff, the Steve Harris influence, sometimes the Geddy Lee, sometimes, just the session player stuff like James Jamerson and Will Lee and people like that I've just heard on records, even Adam Clayton from U2, like, I'm channeling those guys more when I'm playing a supportive role.
Do you feel like when you're playing the supportive roles and you're going through that on tour, do you feel like you have more to say? Like there's things that you're not being able to express, so all that stuff you have to pour, and that's one of the reasons why you wanted to, do your own stuff too?
Yeah, that's kind of why I started getting a little more serious about my solo stuff is that I just felt, yeah, I felt like I had more to say after so many years of being a supportive player and supporting singers. There's a lot that I like to do on the bass that I don't get to do there. And instead of trying to force it into that music, which would be wildly inappropriate, I said, yeah, I just kind of said, well, you know what? I got to start recording my own music and take some of these influences and some of these bands that I like you mentioned, Grey Boy All Stars and some of the 70s TV soundtrack stuff and bands like Headhunters and the Meters and things like that, Tower Power. Take those influences and create my own music based on that. And that way I can say what I want to say on bass without being inappropriate for the music. Because as a hired gun player, as a session player, touring player, the number one rule is you always play for the song. You don't play for yourself. So if I were playing with a singer and I'm throwing in a lot of this stuff, funk influence kind of stuff, it wouldn't work. I'd be fired.
I'd love to hear a Shania Twain funk rendition. It'd be pretty cool.
Well, I mean, yeah, most of her music and the hits that don't have any place for that. But some of her new stuff actually was kind of fun. We had this one song that I loved playing on the last tour. It was called Number One from her latest album. And it was all like a keyboard-based thing, but it kind of had this disco vibe. It was almost like Jamiroquai-ish. And I was able to like do a cool, like muted pick funk thing on it. And that was cool because it was like that's the kind of style that I would do on my own stuff. And so it was fun that she introduced that into the set and I got to do that on one song.
Did you have any influence over that, or was that already a
No, she's actually really musically a very easy artist to work with, in that she basically just says, here are the records, get as close as you can. And she doesn't really nitpick what we do. So I was able to just kind of use my best judgment and defer to our musical director about what to do on it. And musical director even was like, had no opinion. He's like, use your best judgment and make it good. And so said, okay, well, there's this keyboard bass part that's kind of this sort of disco-y sort of thing. But if I play it on a bass with flat wound strings and a pick and I'm palm muting, and I can do some of that like dead note stuff, it works and it sounds cool and it emulates that vibe. And I think it brings more of a live band thing to this song. And so I was able to just do that.
Yeah, it's super cool. And I love that you brought up Jamiroquai. It's one of my favorite bands. And
that's one of my favorite bands for sure. Yeah.
I have a story with I'm sure Jay wouldn't care if I tell this story, but I used to be a music buyer for Tower Records way back in the day in Philly. Cool. And the first album came out and it was I think on Maverick before Sony signed him. And I got that album and I was like, oh my God, what is this? And he's playing the didgeridoo. Like, this is mind blowing. And the guy from Sony's like, new album out. Would you sign him to like a 12 album deal, whatever it was? He's like, he's doing like a little meet and greet. Do you want to meet him? Yeah, sure. So we go over and he's got his hat on. He's got his Adidas. He's JK like you see in the videos. And yeah. I come over to him. I'm like, hey man, how's it going? He's like, yeah, cool. I'm like, having fun? He goes, nah, boring. I said, you want to smoke a joint? So we went in my car, actually, me and my other buddy and JK, and we were consuming some cannabis. And this is back when cannabis was illegal. So we were really careful. And and I had this Acura Integra, and JK is a big car collector. He's like, and then he's even more now than he was then. But he's like, I have Ferrari, Lamborghini, this and that. So I had a car that had automatic seatbelts. So when you open up the door, the seatbelt goes up and then goes back. And he's used to smoking spliffs, which is mixed with tobacco. So he may have gotten a little tad bit too high. So he kept opening and closing the door. He was so fascinated with the seatbelt. And I'm like, you're letting the smoke out, it's illegal. And I'm like, and then we get a knock on the window of my car. I'm like, oh shit. And I'm going to get Jay in trouble and all that stuff. It's his manager. He's like, there's people waiting for you. You got to go in and you're getting high and blah, blah, blah. And he's yelling at us. And I'm like, do you want to smoke? And he's like, yeah. So we get the manager high too.
Amazing.
Yeah. So it was a fun experience. We got to hang out a couple of times, but he hasn't toured the US in forever. But yeah,
it's been too long. And I miss them, man. I'm such a fan. I think the last time I saw him live out here was 2005.
Yeah, it's been a long time. You're absolutely right. So how how does a musician make money these days?
That is a good question because it keeps getting harder and harder. Uh, but yeah, I mean, that's such a legit question because you look at streaming royalties, which are like nothing. Like
Right.
people don't pay for recorded music anymore. You don't really sell records. Um, you still get paid to tour, and I'd say that that's how I make a living these days is touring. I put out my own music and put it out there. I don't make money on it, you know. I'll go out and play my own gigs, maybe sell some merch, but that doesn't do anything. It's all like it all kind of supports the costs of me going out and touring and paying my band and stuff like that. But I mean, guys like me will get paid to record music for other people. We'll get paid to go on tour with people. Some of us will license our music, get it put in film and TV, things like that, commercials, things like that. Some of us teach. I don't teach a lot. I teach when people approach me and want to learn something from me, but I don't I don't really teach for a living. It's something I do every now and then. But a lot of people, I know a lot of guitarists and bass players that have a steady roster of students. Um, so it's really you need to kind of diversify. You need to have a few different streams of income. And for me also, I have a side hustle as well. Like real estate is kind of a side hustle. So like we bought and sold a few houses and we have some rental properties. So that, you know, that keeps me stable as well. Well, I wouldn't say stable, but there's a little bit of income from that stuff, which helps. But yeah, really, it's like you're not making money by selling your music so much anymore. So we just have to be creative and live performance, and a lot of people are doing Patreons, things like that, where they're doing content that people will pay for. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely this the industry has definitely changed a lot from, you're selling records, but I did hear the first time in the last it's since the CDs came out, vinyl actually became like the medium that's getting more sales than anything else. So maybe
Mhm.
there's a resurgence of that and putting music on vinyl. But like as you said, you really don't make as much money on actually selling music. It's more of the, touring and the performance as well.
Yeah.
How did you get the idea for like our origin story?
It sort of came up. I mean, the concept for the album came up as we were already maybe halfway done with it. I retitled some songs to come up with this concept. I was trying to think of album art, and I was trying to think of uh, a title, things like that. And I wanted it to be different than just like you know some generic name or whatever. So I just came up with this concept of it being more like a comic book thing, comic book character's origin story, and all the names of the songs kind of hint at how I grew up and experiences growing up. So it all kind of it's kind of like a little homage to Pittsburgh where I grew up in my childhood there.
Very cool. From a dynamic in a band, because you've been a supporting player on in different bands, how did you make a decision, or how do you make a decision when you pick your players for your own band? And is it important to have, a friendship or some sort of relationship because you're spending time with, these people on the road?
Oh, absolutely. And me just being in LA as long as I've been here and doing a wide variety of gigs, I know a lot of musicians and I know musicians that have certain strengths. And when I'm writing my music, I kind of get people in mind that I know will sound good with the stuff that I'm writing. And I try to think outside the box a little bit as well. Um, I think of my drummer Randy Cook, who played on my last couple albums. He does mostly a lot of pop and rock gigs and things like that. My thing is instrumental. It's definitely got jazz influences where Randy doesn't really come from that world, but his pocket is so good, and that's the most important thing in my music is just the groove. And I've played with him in different situations, and we play well together. He's so easy to lock in with. And so even though maybe I don't think of Randy as a jazz guy, he sounds great on this material just because he's got such musical sensibilities and his feel is so good. Um, and then, the other players I wanted, again, I don't want like jazz guys. I want guys that have kind of a rock sensibility, also a funk sensibility, a vintage type sound. So my buddy Josh Gooch, who was my bandmate with Shania Twain, he's the guitarist on my last couple albums on most of the tracks, and he's just kind of got a lot of different influences. He's coming from like Allman Brothers and blues, but also jazz, like John Scofield and Bill Frisell. He's got these influences that I thought would really fit within the music I was writing. Same with the keyboardists that I've used, Ty Bailey and Kerry Frank, a couple of great Hammond B3 organ players. I decided that that's kind of the keyboard wise, that's the focus I wanted in my music, was like vintage keyboards, like a lot of clavinet and Rhodes and Hammond B3 organ, and those guys are great with the vintage keyboard stuff. So yeah, it's basically just kind of, once I write the music and have a general concept in mind, I just kind of think about all the guys that I've played with and heard around town, and who would do the music justice.
Being a seasoned, professional in the space, but also being a new musician, because like, you're going out and you're doing your own thing now. Are there pros and cons to having, like you mentioned, one, everybody pretty much, so you can probably grab, musicians for you, but are there other pros and cons being new, but also having that seasoning behind you?
Yeah, it's tough. It's very humbling actually, because I've gotten used to playing big tours with big artists in arenas and stadiums and things like that. And it's been great, and I get paid well to do it. And now I'm practically begging to play in some club somewhere for 80% of the door, which who knows how many people I'm going to get there. Up until recently, I only did gigs with my own band around LA. So a lot of my friends would come out, and I could pretty much, figure that I would have a draw, because I know a lot of people that may be interested in hearing me. But now that I'm playing in cities, who's going to show up, and it's always a learning experience. But also, I'm walking away from these gigs. I'll fly my band out to New York and do this show, and walk away with, I don't know, $600 for the night for the show, and I've spent $5,000 to do the show. So there's definitely an investment, and pros and cons. I guess you could say that that's a con. I mean, no one wants to lose money when they play, but I don't, at this point in my career of being a solo artist, I don't really look at it as losing money. I look at it as an investment. I know it's going to cost me money, and I know that the kind of things I'm doing now, at least just getting out there into the clubs for whoever shows up, I know that's what I have to do now to lay the groundwork in order to get on the festivals and higher guarantee type shows. And so that's the goal. So I guess you asked pros and cons. The pros also is I find it very satisfying for my soul.
Yeah.
Because up until this point, I've made a living playing other people's music and doing what they required of me. And now I get to have my own voice and do things the way I want to do them. That's not to say it's a con to play with other artists and have to play with what they want me to play, because that's what I chose to do, and it's a craft and I enjoy it. But this is just really fun. It's really satisfying artistically to do my own thing. And if I have to weather the storm by going out a year in the red in order to build it, that's just what I have to do.
Yeah, I think that, and when you're connecting to your own stuff, this is yours. So you're exposed out there too. So it's now people are looking at you, and you're not just supporting somebody else, like you mentioned Gwen Stefani, Shania Twain. You're exposed, and being an introvert, like you said, how do you allow yourself to be that exposed, to be upfront, because it's your own music and there's critics and all those other things, and having a few people show up to a gig, how does that make you feel, and how do you overcome some of those obstacles?
Well, I think all the experience I've had on other stages has helped me do what I'm doing now, because when I'm playing with these pop star types, I'm still out there, even though it's not my name on the marquee. They're not really looking at me. I'm running around. I'm being animated on stage. I'm drawing attention. And that's something I have to do in my own thing as well. I have to be engaging. I have to give people something to want to watch and listen to. So I think all of that made me comfortable enough to be center stage now. Just all those years of doing that, I feel very comfortable being up there, having the focus be on me. I feel very comfortable on the mic, bantering with the crowd, talking shit on the mic, joking around. Like I feel comfortable doing that. I think it's fun, and I think just the experience I've had playing in front of people all these years has made me comfortable like that. And as far as I think you mentioned something about scrutiny or whatever, people, you know, do I worry about what people are going to think or say? Like, of course, I kind of forget about it when I'm on stage and I just play and I just kind of let the music do the talking. But yeah, there's so many elements in being a solo artist. You're opening yourself up to a lot of criticism and a lot of scrutiny. But it's part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the feel like difference wise? I think I already know the answer, but I'll ask it. I'll try to ask it in a different way. Playing a stadium versus playing like a club. Uh, there's a lot of musicians that I've spoken with are like, you're playing a stadium. Are the people even hearing what you're saying? They're screaming and all that stuff. You have a much more intimate experience. Like people can actually experience your music much in a much different way when we're playing the club. But I just went to see Steve Miller, Journey, and Def Leppard at SoFi. I
Cool.
mean, incredible, right? But it's SoFi. It's so huge. Right? I saw the Stones there too. It's so huge. It's a completely different experience than seeing you at the Baked Potato or seeing, a Carl Denson or Grey Boy All Stars in Venice West. Like there's such an intimate experience and exchange of energy. Do you feel that when you're performing as well?
Yeah, for sure. And being on stage like in an arena or a stadium, yeah, I think there's so many people and they're not up close to you. So you feel a little bit more of a disconnect. Like if I'm in a club and like you said, the Baked Potato or Venice West or something like that, people are right there. And especially me being center stage, they're right there looking at me. And that, people will say, "Oh, don't you get nervous playing in the arenas and stadiums?" And I'm like, "No, I'll get more butterflies being in a club when people are right in front of me, like looking up at me. When I'm playing a big venue, also I'm playing with the singer, so the focus isn't on me; it's on the singer. But I don't get nervous on that stuff at all, just because it's just so big. It's just hard to fathom. You're not feeling that intimacy and connection that you feel in a club. But at this point, I wouldn't say I get nervous at all anymore. I do it all the time. But if I were to compare, I'd say like I feel a little bit more sort of like anticipation or whatever.
Excited. It's the same energy as you,
I,
nerves and excitement, same
yeah,
energy.
and it's a different kind of excitement because like when you walk out in front of thousands of screaming people, it's amazing. It's like wow, like holy shit, this is what I used to watch on MTV, and like I'm here getting to do it. So that's a different kind of excitement than being up there in front of a handful of people and being like, I'm going to play my music and I hope they like it.
But does that change? Like, so if you're up close and you're having that exchange of energy and you see the people, you can actually see like faces and you see them reacting. Does that influence your playing as well? Does that make you, do you have this energy exchange with a crowd that's
Oh,
different in an arena?
yeah, definitely. Especially if they're into it. If you can tell they're into it and they're listening and they're cheering you on, of course, you know. But if they're sitting there and they're just like talking and not paying attention, then it goes the opposite way. And that happens too.
Does that?
And you notice it, in an arena, sure, a lot of people are talking. Not everybody is silent and focused. People are drinking, they're having a good time, but you don't notice it in an arena. You've got so many people. But if you've got like a couple of people sitting at a table in front of you at a jazz club and they're just like talking to each other, sure, to me, that's just more distracting, because they're right there.
It's like the piano player in the club that Billy Joel used to say, where there's a piano player just playing in the background and you guys are having a conversation, same kind of thing. Pay attention.
Yeah. And I try to, I'm at this point in my life and career, I'm not really into doing gigs that are background music. And I think the things that that I'm doing of my own shows aren't really, they're not background music. It's
No.
people are there to listen, and I'm going for more of like the jam band audience now than I am the jazz club audience. I'd rather play in front of people that are just like grooving in front of the stage and standing and having fun than like people that are sitting down at a table watching. It's just more fun, you know.
But I just think like funk has, and I don't know how you classify your music, but I put it sort of in this funky, jazzy groove category. I think it's having a resurgence, and I start seeing like even older musicians come out, and funk bands, and there's a young crowd there. So I definitely think it's an energy that is continuing now, and it's being used in a lot of other types of music, rock, funk. It's coming back. So I definitely think there's a resurgence of that music.
Yeah, definitely. And that's kind of pushed me to focus on my thing more, to see the audiences come out for it, for artists like Corey Wong and like we saw each other at the Great Boy All Stars, which obviously they've been around for a while. But some of these other like instrumental sort of jazz funk artists that are out there doing it, Wolfpack,
Oh, yeah.
things like bands like that, the Motet, Lettuce, bands like that. I'm seeing crowds come out, both young and old, for it, and I'm seeing that there is an audience for this kind of music. And so that's what is kind of pushing me to make more of a thing of my music, seeing that it is possible. It is having a resurgence. And I've been going, we have a part-time place out in Telluride, Colorado, and they've got a great jazz fest there. And we've gone 3 years in a row. And every time I go, it's kind of like I'm studying, I'm seeing who's playing there, how people are reacting to it, how my music may fit into that world, and just kind of researching the people to contact to get into that world as far as like booking, promoters and festivals, things like that. Because I see that people are into it, and I just think, there could be an audience for my music.
But 100%. I definitely, and you mentioned the bands that I was gonna say Lettuce, who I just love, and they were just played the Novo here. I see you on the same stages, and Volpac I think is playing Palladium a couple nights in a
Hmm.
row. It's exactly the type of category that I see for you. So like there are festivals, similar to like Beach Life Fest and etc. I definitely see you on those stages. Is that the trajectory that you kind of see yourself in as well?
Definitely. That's what I'm aiming for, and that's why I'm out there booking clubs myself, just to get the band out there. Hopefully invite some promoters and some agents out to some shows. The goal for me is to get a booking agent, get management, and make this a bigger part of my career than it is. I'd like for my project to become the forefront of my career, and my sideman session work to be kind of the side part. Whereas right now, the main focus for me is well, up until recently, has been playing with other artists, and then my thing is kind of the side thing, and I'm just trying to do the vice versa of
Yeah,
that.
you flip it.
Yeah.
Can you have a family life as a touring musician?
Yeah, I mean, depending on how long you're out, there are some bands and artists that are out all year long, slugging it out in a van and things like that. And I think it gets more difficult that way. For me, I've been able to tour with artists that tour comfortably, touring in a bus, doing fly dates. I haven't done the van thing in a long time. And so it's easier to, fly my wife out when we have a couple of days off. And plus the schedule's not too overloaded. When I'm playing with artists like Shania, they don't want to work too hard. They're not going to do 10 shows in a row. Like Shania, an artist like Shania is going to do 2 shows in a row and then take a day or two off. And so in that case, on tours like that, it's easier because I've got some days off. I could be in one city for 5 days or something, and then my wife can come out. Me doing my own thing, it's a little more difficult because there's not really a budget, and having, somebody come out, have my wife come out, it's just a little more difficult. She's going to come out to some things, help me sell merch, things like that. But you can't come out to everything. But the goal, like I said, is to get on the festivals and get on things that are a little bit more, have a higher budget. So we're not just out there in a van playing a bunch of shows. And I think also me being at this point in life, and my band being at their at points in life and career, nobody's going to want to just be in a van for a couple of months at a time. So I'm going out for short runs. Like there are 4 shows, maybe. I think really the most I'd want to do in a row are 5 shows, because people get burnt after that.
Speaking of do you have a health regimen, a recovery routine? Because it's like being out and playing. Yes, it's physical, but you have all this adrenaline and dopamine and all that stuff. Do you have a certain routine that you do after shows and try to get yourself physically prepared and also mentally prepared?
In general, I do. I don't think it's specifically right before or after a show, but I mean, I work out. Exercise is really a big part of my life, and as I age, I'm 50 now, and I just realize how important it is and how important strength training is. So I do a lot of core work. I do a lot of strength training. Um, I'm not doing as much cardio now as I used to. I used to be a marathon runner, so I would train for marathons on tour. I would go out for a 20-mile run and then meet everybody at sound check, like that sort of thing. And so I used to spend a lot of my time on tour running. Now I'm not doing as much of that, and I'm focusing more on strength training and yoga, a lot of stretching, things like that I know my body needs. Because I think all the years I've spent jumping around with a weight strapped to one shoulder, it's definitely taken its toll on my body. Like I have a lot of aches and pains these days. So um, every day I have to stretch, I have to work out, I have to do some form of yoga, some form of strengthening. So that's a big part of it. And before and after shows, I'll stretch out a little bit, just warm up a little bit, just make sure I'm loose and limber. But just in general in life, yeah, I have to exercise. It's a big part of it.
What about like food and supplements and all the other stuff?
Yeah, I
Is that
started
important?
supplementing more and being more diligent about all my, my vitamins, and always bring protein powder out with me, making sure I'm getting enough protein, creatine, things like that. I'm vegan, so I'm a pretty healthy eater. I've been a vegetarian for God 34 years now, vegan for about four. Finally made the jump into that, or maybe five, something like that. But yeah, so I eat healthy. Really cut back on drinking. I don't drink a whole lot anymore. Um, yeah, so I just try to stay healthy. Drink a lot of water.
Yeah.
That's
Cool.
it.
All right. So I have a few questions I ask all my guests. Mu a lot of them are not music people, so the answers to these questions are always funny. But do you remember, and if so, what was the very first concert that you attended?
Yeah, the very first concert I attended was Sean Cassidy. For people who don't know, he was like a teen idol in the 70s. And my sister was a big fan. And so my parents took us to see him at the Pittsburgh Civic Arena, I believe it was. So that was my first concert. I don't remember a whole lot about it. But funny thing is, years later, I was playing in a wedding band and I played his wedding. So it's pretty funny. I never got a chance to talk to him. It was his wedding. I didn't want to go
I was
by.
gonna say,
Hey,
did
my
you tell
first
him
concert.
that was my first concert?
Make him feel old. I didn't want to do that. But yeah, it was just kind of a full circle moment. Like, oh wow, like he was my first concert, and here I am playing his wedding.
That's so funny. What was the last concert you attended?
Last concert, I mean, that I wasn't playing. I mean, I've been doing some
Yeah,
stuff.
that you weren't playing.
Oh, what was it? God, what was it? Oh, Pink. It was Pink in Boston. I saw her just a few weeks ago.
Oh,
It was incredible. Like I've seen her a couple times, got some friends in her band, and we went out to Boston to see her and joined some friends, and it was incredible. She puts on such a good show. Her band is great. She's a great artist. She treats everybody well. Everybody loves her. So yeah, she's one of the good ones for sure.
she was my neighbor in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. Her dad
Really?
used to, yeah, her dad used to, when she was a kid, her dad used to come in. My ex sister-in-law used to work at like Office Max or one of those Staples kind of places. And he used to come in and make flyers himself for her as she was starting out. So,
That's
yeah,
so cool. Right? Yeah, I knew she was from the Philly area.
yeah, exactly.
Second, grab my drink here. Cool.
All right. So, for the next year, you can only listen to 5 albums. And I usually preface by saying you don't need to know the name of the album. You can just say it's a, Big Floyd album, whatever it is. What will be those 5 albums? And by the way, I know this question is always weird because people ask me and I'm like, that thing changes. So I'm just capturing a moment in time right now.
It's interesting because I've got a few albums that I'm listening to a lot right now that I'm listening to on rotation that are great. A lot of great music coming out. Um, but if it was like if I had to pick 5 albums for, I don't know, you said the next
Year.
5, whatever you said. It'd probably be some stuff that I've been listening to my whole life anyway, because figure if I'm not sick of it by now, I wouldn't be sick of it, if I had five. So, some of the biggest albums for me are definitely like I mentioned, that Sting Bring on the Night live album, Peter Gabriel Secret World Live. Those are like two of my, and they're both live albums, but those are two of my just go-to favorite albums. Led Zeppelin Physical Graffiti or Houses of the Holy could be a tie between the two. Stevie Wonder Songs in the Key of Life. That's a double album. So, oh, there you go. Yeah. I mean, come on. It's just such a classic. Michael Jackson Off the Wall, maybe. That's probably more than five.
No,
Yeah.
I think that's five.
Yeah.
If I count correctly.
I'd say those. And of course, there's some other ones that could be in there as well. Could be interchangeable, but there's five good ones.
Cool. Okay. Final question. Please describe what your room looked like growing up.
Wow. Okay.
And you can choose any room you want, because I know you said you moved around. So whatever one that speaks to you right now.
Yeah, we moved around quite a bit. And I will say this, one of my coolest childhood bedrooms was when we lived in Cleveland. The house we lived in had like a little apartment attached to it, like a little ADU, mother-in-law house, whatever. It's like a little apartment. So it was attached to the house. You go down in the basement and then there'd be this little apartment. So it had two really small bedrooms, a bathroom, then you go up these stairs and there's like a tiny kitchen and a tiny living room. And that was all mine, which was so cool. So that was my favorite room growing up. I had this little apartment. So I had my bedroom, I had kind of a bunk bed, like a loft bed that I had for many years as a kid. And that was pretty much took up the whole room. And then on the other side, I had my practice room. I had my own little practice room. So I had a desk, I had my amp, I had my stereo. And that's where I spent so much time as a kid. And that had like posters all over the walls. I remember I had Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction, a bunch of pictures I'd ripped out of Bass Player magazine. Remember, I had this one picture of Billy Sheehan and Jack Bruce up on the wall. I had this one electric bass poster. It was interesting. I probably got it at my local music store, but it had a bunch of your classic basses. It had like a P bass, a Hofner, a jazz bass, a Rickenbacker, even a Kubicki Factor and an Alembic. This is from the late 80s. And then it had like a picture of the fretboard and all the notes and like little tab things on it. It just had like electric bass on it. And I had that. And the funny thing is, this past weekend, I was in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, which is where guitarist friend Corey Churko's from.
Yeah.
We played a festival up there. And we went to the music store where he bought his very first guitar is still there, a little mom and pop music store. And we went in there and they had that electric bass poster on the wall from the 80s. So I was like, oh my God, I had this on my wall as a kid. So yeah, that's kind of what my room looked like as a kid, my little apartment in Cleveland.
Super cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, Derek, where can people connect with you? Where can people engage with you? Anybody that's listening that is tour manager or anybody wants to, get engaged with what I consider great artists, great music. So, where can people reach out to you?
I mean, my website is derekfrank.com. That's DEREKFRANK. Instagram is Derek Frank Bass. And that's also YouTube. My YouTube channel is Derek Frank Bass. Those are kind of the big ones. I mean, I'm on Facebook as well.
Yeah.
Same thing, facebook.com/Derek Frank Bass. I'd say I'm more active on Instagram than anything. I don't do TikTok. I refuse. I'm too old for TikTok.
You don't want to do a couple of dances and
yeah. Yeah, I think once you're 50, you can have a pass and not need a TikTok account. Yeah, so I'd say Instagram, and I try to keep my schedule updated on my website and things like that. And there's also an email list there. I send out an email maybe twice a year with tour dates, if there's new music out, things like that. So people can get on the email list if they're so inclined.
Cool. And people can get your music and merch or anything else there as well.
My music's everywhere. It's on all the streaming sites, Spotify and all that stuff. And then I've got merch on a Bandcamp page, which is just derekfrank.bandcamp.com. And that's a place where people can order vinyl, they can order CDs, they can order shirts. I got all kinds of merch up there. Cool. And Bandcamp is a great platform. I use it a lot to buy albums either digitally or physically from artists because they get most of the money that way. So I try to promote the Bandcamp as much as possible, but not everybody's on it.
Yeah.
But yeah, all my merch is up there and a bunch of music to download as well.
Cool. And for my audience, thank you for listening. Appreciate all the wonderful reviews we've been getting. So it's great. And buy my book. I'm not trying to plug anything, but thank you for getting it on Amazon. It's making cannabis personal. And appreciate everybody listening. Derek, man, really appreciate your time. This was great. And hopefully I'll see you performing soon. We'll get together. All right.
For sure. Thanks for having
Appreciate
me.
it, man. Thank you.
Right on.